Everyone. We're here for a work session on the superintendent's FY 2020 recommended budget. This is the first work session, and there will be no formal action taken today. We have the opportunity to listen to the staff and superintendent's presentation. We have the opportunity to ask questions and have discussion. And with that, I'll turn it over to the superintendent, Dr. Michael.
Thank you, President Williams. Board members, so as Mrs. Williams has indicated, very informal today. I've asked staff to do the presentation. They're kind of our number cruncher people. I do want the board to know, much like we did last year, we went through every page of the budget. We actually went through every line of the budget. We had 19 individual budget meetings beyond just our own internal budget discussions. So we had 19 individual meetings scheduled. We brought in supervisors, directors, senior staff, talked about the whole way through the budget, instruction, operations, everything. When you get back to the line by line, you're going to see a lot of moving of numbers. Some of that's the result of, as we talked with supervisors, they would say, you know, I really could use another 15,000 there, but if I don't have it, I move it from over here to over there. And we said, well, we don't have another 15,000 to give you like I would like to. So this is the way we worked on the budget. We did not instantly add things when people made a request. But I said, if you're going to move 15,000 from here to there to make that whole, let's just go ahead and do that in the budgeting process. So you're going to see a lot of numbers move around in the budget. The savings we've been able to generate in the budget this year is around 700,000. Some of that, again, came out of that healthcare selection, what people selected for various types of healthcare. And a lot of the rest of it is just moving around of items in the budget to try to make them accurately reflect what we think is going to happen as we move into FY 2020. We tried to address a variety of needs in the budget, and we'll talk about those as we go through it. And while it's a substantial amount of money we need for FY 2020, this is in no way a wish list or anything that's going to substantially move us forward. This is a kind of a bare bones what we think we need to maintain some level of progress. You can ask questions during the presentation. We kind of have a front-end part that's the PowerPoint walks through right sizing for the current year and some changes to the budget and some things we're adding to the budget. And then we get into the detailed pages and summaries and then the 41-page document itself. But we're open to questions anytime you might have them or anything. Just very informal process. With that, I'm going to turn it over to David and he'll walk us through the budget.
All right, so like any company, we would start off with what our revenue is projected to be. And a lot of that is guesswork. Some things we know, some things we're guessing right now. We know that our enrollment this fall is down 109 students. Our state funding for that would be about $500,000, give or take. We know that the foundation program, though, is generally tied to an inflation factor. And we are estimating, we haven't seen any exact numbers yet, we won't for another month, but we are estimating that increase in the foundation program would be about 2%. And we're also projecting that the transportation program, which is tied to a separate inflation target just for transportation items, will increase 2%. If that happens, we should be in better shape than what the loss of our students would indicate, because the increase due to inflation would more than offset the loss from the enrollment being down a little bit. We know that the state English Learners Program is estimated to increase because we have more kids in that program this year. We're up 14.3% to 567 students that the money should be based on this when the numbers come out a month from now. Any questions about that page? We also, the fact is that we don't know what statewide, what the farms numbers are doing, but I would assume that the rest of the state is probably doing at least as well on average as Washington County is, Washington County's enrollment is down from 48.5% to 47%. As I mentioned, the state appropriations will be released, we estimate, on January 18th. If that follows prior year's patterns, it's usually the Friday after the governor presents his budget to the legislature. And of course, our allocations are affected by what happens in the rest of the state, the number of farm students statewide, what the enrollment does. So there is some variability based on how we do compared to how the rest of the state does. So as far as local revenue, we talked about state revenue, now we'll talk about local revenue. The maintenance of effort, due to the enrollment being down 109 students, is calculated at a reduction of $490,000. The low effort status of Washington County government is yet to be determined. We might find out about that before Christmas. We might find out in January. Last year, that was $1.3 million to us. We don't know how much the wealth of the county has grown. It's measured by income tax revenue and property taxes on a per student basis. So we have yet to see that, but the last 2 years we know that has been a factor in what the county funding has been.
Well, and I think, Mr. Brandenburg, low effort's also related to other counties and what they give above maintenance of effort.
It's based on what the rest of the state is doing as far as the giving of the percentage of the county budget and what the wealth is doing across the state.
Another important thing to note in this slide, while we're down 109 students, that's 109 K to 12 students. We're up in student enrollment because of our pre-K expansion. But we kind of look at this as the money number, and it's not exactly 109. There's some other magic that they do with evening high school kids, and parts of kids, and things like that. Last year, we were up 8 1/4 kids. I don't know what a quarter kid is, but they do some other things with this number. But it's a good benchmark that we're down 109 on what we kind of slang refer to as the money number. But overall, our enrollment's up, but due to pre-K, and pre-K is not part of the state formula yet.
And if I can as well, one of the drawbacks of using on a per student allocation is that, again, 109 students across 47 school buildings is slightly more than 2 students on average per building reduction. Well, you can't reduce a teacher in a school because you're down 2 students across, anywhere from 3 to 5 grades. It just doesn't compute that way. So the services essentially remain the same, yet you have less money to play with.
Yeah, the exact enrollment number will be calculated also in that state aid that we'll be getting a month from now. And they take into consideration factors like our evening high school. We get credit for those. If they take 1 course, that's a quarter. If they take 2, it's a half a student, and so forth. So, looking at all the revenue together, there's on your budget summary, there's a section 1, and so we're putting in there a placeholder right now of $2.5 million. We are estimating that state revenue will come in somewhere between $2 and $3 million. There's some other minor revenue increases for tuition and interest income of about $77,000. It's $0.1 million. And then of all the adjustments to the budget and the redeployments and the new positions and the adjustments from the prior years and so forth, which we'll go over, is $7.98 million. So subtracting those numbers above, we would need somewhere between $4.88 and $5.88 million from the county government in order to balance the budget that's being presented to you today.
And Mr. Brandenburg, that's our best guess on state numbers being between that $2 and $3 million number. They could be 0, they could be negative, they could be higher than that. But being down 109 students, even with a 2% increase to various state funding, staff's done a pretty good estimate of what they believe it reasonably could be. Some kind of ballpark that we hope it's around this range or higher. We'll always take higher.
Okay, so that's the revenue side, and then we get to the expenditure factors. Now, we have slides for each one of these, so I won't spend much time here, but the first step that we do when we're preparing next year's budget is look at any initiatives that were added during the 19 budget, things that we might have done in first quarter or other adjustments we made after the opening of school or what's planned for the second half of the year. So we got to put those things into next year's budget because they weren't already in the base budget. And that consists of a .2 clerical increase at the Washington County Technical High, 10 elementary parapros and 8 special ed parapros to address student needs. And we've got 4 bus drivers to support routes that were previously held by contractors that were either turned in by contractors or reevaluated. And that's a total of $811,000 for those initiatives, adjustments to the current budget.
So, board members, you're aware, we've talked about the 18 parapros. This is the 18 parapros we've just added in the last couple of weeks. So for this year, it's really costing us about a half salary. By the time we get everybody on board and hired and go out through the rest of the year, we'd have to, be prepared to absorb the full-time salaries. So a lot of this is support for special needs students and students with various challenges, particularly in elementary.
And part of that was grant funded this year, but won't be able to be next year, we think.
That was, if I remember correctly, that's an hour and a quarter per day.
I think it was a half-time secretary to .7, secretary at Tech High. Tech High at this point has, one of our largest graduating classes as seniors, so we're running close to 600 students there and needed some additional clerical support.
And for clarification for the board, as you're looking at the headers of each of these slides, so for instance, this one that we're on, which is the adjustments for FY 2019, it's labeled as 2A. As you flip to the next tab in your book and you're in your budget summary, section 2A on the first page is that, and it gives you the breakdown, it gives you the dollar values associated to each one of the line items that are presented here, and that will carry forward as we work through the budget. Each slide associates to that section of the summary, and then on the summary page, as we get to it, you can actually see page number and line item for the full 40-page budget, which is in the third tab of your books.
So that 2A or 2B is found on page 1 of 3 of that summary page, if everybody can see that. Not back in the 41-page documents in that very next tab.
Right, there's a summary page, and then there's a 3-page document that's got the detail on it. Then if we get to 2B, then that would be new positions that we propose to add in FY 20. This is not things that we've already done, but these are things that we believe we need going forward. That consists of a half of a clerical increase in the testing and accountability area, 5 pre-K teachers and accompanying paraprofessionals for new classrooms there, 3 contingency teachers that this is something we've added in the budget in prior years just to give us some flexibility when fall enrollment bubbles pop up. We also need 3 additional English learning teachers because of the number of English learners that are increasing that we talked about earlier. And we've got 10 counselors or social workers as needed to address student needs and improve the ratios throughout our county, and 3 technology professionals. That's a total of $2.18 million. You can see the individual lines on the summary. Now, we are saving 1 position that is an assistant principal that's funded by Title I grants. That's coming out of the general fund, so that's a small savings there. That's at Pangbourne, I believe. And then other needs, we believe we have some non-position needs in the technology area. We need to invest more in our infrastructure equipment, and we need, as we roll out software, we need to support that with money for licenses and the service contracts. And we believe that we are going to need 2 new school resource officers.
Where would they be placed?
At current, we're looking at placing an officer currently at the Eastern Ruth M. Monroe campus. We spent a considerable amount of time on that campus, and that campus is currently covered from the deputy that also covers Smithsburg up to Cascade, because those sites are in the county, so that is a sheriff's deputy position. The other is likely going to be on the Springfield, in the Springfield Middle School building, to assist on the Williamsport campus and also to assist west. So as you know, currently we have an SRO covering Clear Spring to Hancock. So this would be a position that would float between Williamsport to Clear Spring. So as the SRO in Clear Spring maybe heads to Hancock, the Springfield SRO may float a little bit west, so we have a little bit more coverage in that area. But we do see emerging needs on the Williamsport campus.
That totals $823,000. And then we have compensation and benefits for our employees, Section 4A. We believe that to address shortages that we are currently experiencing, we should increase our substitute teacher daily rate by another $10 and increase the home and hospital teaching hourly rate to a 3-tiered structure, something like we have for the substitutes. It depends on the qualifications of the person filling the position, and it might be able to attract some more people to do that kind of work that needs to be done.
That's a question there.
Sure.
Home and hospital teaching, usually is that usually a current staff member that does extra hours?
A lot of times it is. We do have retired people that do that. We have people that do that just as supplemental income that aren't even employed full-time with us. But
Okay, so it's a mix.
historically, it used to be primarily teachers during the day that did that at night. Kind of what's happened, we have that for whatever reason. It's in the contract. It's identified at $25 an hour, and teachers can make $25 an hour without going to someone's home. Through professional development, they can make $35 an hour if they work with children after school at their school. And we just think it's probably been that $25 rate for a long, long time, and we need to address that.
Have we been having a hard time filling those positions?
We have. What we've heard from Carol Costello, with our increase in the number of students we have with home hospitalization, we were kind of 150, jumped to 200. I think we're about 250 now. We'll see that in this afternoon's presentation with the county commissioners. It's just making that many more homes to go to, and it takes that many more people. I think the students only get, I want to say 6 hours of instruction a week. Maybe it's not quite that much. So we just have a need to, we're having a shortage there, much like we're having a substitute shortage.
Got it, thanks.
The next thing we do here is to adjust the salary cost to reflect actual people that we actually have working for us in FY19, to adjust the budget to that salary, to kind of realize the turnover credit. And you can pop in, Eric, if I'm not saying this correctly, but that's a large positive adjustment that we make kind of when we realize the turnover credit of this year's workers.
We receive basically, we budget $3.1 million for turnover credit every year in our budget. So basically, we achieve it 2 ways. One, we achieve it through retirements and attrition, and that's kind of what we're adjusting for right here. We're adjusting the salaries to who we have currently, from who retired and who left at the end of last year to who we have now. And so basically, we achieve half of the budgeted, or about close to 2/3 of the budgeted turnover credit that way, and then the remainder we achieve throughout the year through vacancies as they occur throughout the system.
So every time we have a vacancy and it takes a month to fill the job, whether it's a clerical position, it wouldn't be food service for the general fund, but a custodian, a teacher vacancy, something like that, we pick up money that we didn't spend, and that gets accounted for in the turnover credit every year.
We also have a small adjustment for the pension system rates and administrative fees. Every year that goes up. We're required to pay not only the normal cost on the teachers' systems, we also are required to pay administrative fees on both systems. And of course, we cover the employee system contribution entirely. So we've built in what we know about the rates at this point, or what we estimate. We also have provided for a premium increase in health insurance of 3%. You'll recall it was 5% this past year. So we believe that there have been some positive developments, even though we had kind of a high first quarter. We believe we've got some positive plan changes that will help us out, and we are estimating that we will need a 3% increase in the health premium this year.
David, I think we have information. They anticipate that healthcare will continue to go up 6 or 7%. So right now, with the changes that we've made, somewhat with our plan, with the adjustments that we made last year, we're seeing, we're coming up out of the hole, and we're trying to get to that sustainable $3 million number. So we're hoping with 3%, we've kind of hit the sweet spot of what will be enough. We went through a number of years where we were in good shape with the the healthcare budget, we had 0 or 1% changes, and all of a sudden we found ourselves 6 or 7 million in the hole. So we're just trying to watch what inflation of healthcare is going to do. So we could have the exact same number of claims next year, but we anticipate that costs would be up potentially 6 or 7% overall. So we're hoping with the healthy outlook that we have right now with the increasing fund balance and this 3%, we try to get to that $3 million mark year and a half away when we close out the 2020 budget.
Yeah, so fortunately or unfortunately, we pay our claims. And so if our group has favorable experience, we all benefit from that. If our group has, higher claims for some reason, then that causes us, we don't have to go by what an insurance company thinks it's going to be. We pay our actual claims. Then we also are putting in a provision to increase the OPEB contribution. We've talked about that much in the past, also at the time of the annual audit and so forth. We believe that we should step that up somewhat, so we've got a provision in there for that. And we've also got a provision for the salary resource pool that's currently being negotiated. And then we've got, as Dr. Michael mentioned in the opening, we went through the budget line by line with the supervisors and directors, and we have made numerous line item changes. The net benefit of that is $746,000 reduction. And we can certainly talk about any questions you have on that section. That concludes the PowerPoint, and we'll open it up to your questions.
And I think to David's point on the multiple line-by-line analysis, of that 746,000 in savings, the vast majority of that is actually the board's contribution into health insurance fund that is based on the subscriber mix. So as we've discussed with you previously, as employees have shifted their health plan status, let's say from a family plan to a single or only a spousal plan, or we actually right now are realizing a savings where we have less subscribers in our insurance plan as we had the year before, that generates a savings to the board in terms of the contributions that we make based on what employees choose to do with our health plan. So that's where the majority of the savings is. There is a risk there that if all of a sudden the subscriber mix shifts back the other way, or more employees decide to enroll in the healthcare plan, we need to put more in. So it's a savings at this juncture, but it is there is a risk factor to taking that savings.
But over a 2-year period, if we pass this budget, we will have essentially scraped out of the budget almost $3 million?
That's correct.
About
That's correct.
2.2 last year?
That's what we anticipate, yes. We're happy to answer any questions you may have. Again, as you look at your book, the next tab beyond the PowerPoint is the line-by-line summary of the changes that staff has recommended to you and through the superintendent. And then the full 40 pages is behind that if you want to look at individual departments.
I had a couple questions. One on State English Learners Program. I don't know much about that. Is that a pool of funding that's available when you have needs?
I think we anticipate at the state level, because the states continue to see an increase in English learners, that we're going to see that pool go up. As our number goes up, we think there's a per pupil allotment. It's not a lot of money, but when our increased number of students, provided that pool increases, we should get a little income from that.
The revenue related to that pool of students is $2.4 million in the current budget.
For example, last year, I think we had similar enrollment increases, maybe a little bit more than this year, but last year we gained almost $500,000 in that bucket of funding due to increased student.
Because we had more children.
Yes.
Yeah, got it.
It's up about 100 last year, I think.
Second question would be, do we know, based on the fact that you talk about the money number doesn't include pre-K students, do we have any idea if we were to factor in pre-K students, what that ask would be? So let's just pretend for a minute maintenance of effort did include our pre-K population.
Pick up 800 to 900 full-time equivalents so it'd be substantial. We pick it up on the county side and on the state side, so what's our number, 13, 14,000?
I'm looking at big round numbers, and Eric's probably doing a little more exact as I'm giving you this, but roughly 850 students in pre-K as of September 30th, I think was the number we shared earlier. Roughly $4,500 per student is $3.8 million. That's just local.
That's on the local
That's just
side.
local funding.
Local funding.
That
State
doesn't
side
even count
also,
the state,
State side.
which could be twice as much.
And we know that as we hear from the Kerwin Commission and as we hear from, basically looking ahead into future years, at some point, we're ahead of the game, but pretty much every county is probably going to be required to offer some form of expanded pre-K, correct?
What I've seen in the Kerwin Commission, they're looking at expanding to full-day pre-K for all counties, for all students. I think it would be optional over the next 10 years. They've talked about 3-year-old programs as well. They've talked about a sliding scale for people who have means that might have to pay for pre-K. They've also talked about supplementing childcare facilities that offer instruction. So they're not looking necessarily for all of it to come to public school systems. So that's like a whole pot of things they've talked about. What I think is going to happen with Kerwin, people are going to see the Kerwin Commission submitted here at some point in its entirety, but what we think is going to happen, and what I've heard is going to happen, it'll be adopted in pieces. So there'll be no such thing, I don't think, as a Kerwin adoption, $4.4 billion approved, and it happens tomorrow. I think, somebody will pick a piece of pre-K, and not just all of pre-K, but a piece of it, and they'll do some type of legislation on that. And then a piece of legislation about teacher qualifications, and a piece of legislation about another component of it, is how we think it's going to unroll. And how quick that's going to happen, will still look like Kerwin when it goes through the legislative body. I'll direct that to Mr. Trotta, how often that happens, I don't know.
The chances are what we did this year by expanding pre-K is going to be a trend we're going to see in other counties.
I think
Probably required. by the
we
state.
already see that in other counties. I think it's Garrett that offers full-day pre-K for all of their students already. They're also the leading county in kindergarten readiness, Garrett County.
There you go.
So, I think that's where I'd like to see us be. The kindergarten readiness report will be state, it's going to release that on January 22nd. There'll be a state report. That's when we'll get to see other county information. Preliminary information, and I think it's semi-embargoed, is positive for us, for our students that were in pre-K with us. There's still some troubling information in that report, and there's still a lot of information to come, so I don't want to get ahead of that. We have that scheduled, I think, for February 5th to make a presentation to the board after the state board gets it on January 22nd. I think we have a board meeting on the 22nd. If there's any additional information I can give you on the 22nd, I'll certainly do that. I can promise you, assure you, we are seeing results of pre-K. I was in a number of pre-Ks today. I'm amazed at what pre-K students can do and are doing. And we're going to have to step it up in kindergarten for the future. You can't start with the letter A with every student in the room, because there's children that are entering kindergarten that are reading. So I think it's a very, very positive move. I think it's going to help address special needs students. I think it's going to address some of our English language learners if they're with us at 4 years old. It's definitely helping to close some gaps with some of our children of poverty. It's been a very, very successful so far, and that's why in our budget's 5 more additional positions. I wish I could put 25 more in there. I wish we had the space, and it's going to make a huge difference for all children, not just children that are in need.
And the other question I had was the increase in counselor social workers. I'm happy to see that in there as well. I'm trying to think of how much of that need goes into safety and security, and if there's a way to recover some of that funding as we spend more money on school safety in the state. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand your question. Our goal with the 10 counselors/social workers is really start to try to address some more of this mental illness challenge that we have. I know there's an expectation that people want to see a full-time counselor in every building. While I want to see that as well, what we're going to do with the 10 positions, we'd like to have more, obviously. Maybe we don't end up with 10. I don't know when the budget all shakes out. But we're strategically going to locate the counselors around various places in the county, pick counselors or social workers based on the need of the schools. We have the need at some places to have 2 or 3 combination of counselors and social workers. And there still may be schools that have shared support. Just by the sheer volume of the number of students and the needs of the students. Our schools are very, very different in Washington County. And a lot of people don't know that or understand that. So there might be some pushback, why don't we have this resource or that resource? But that's part of the job that I'm charged with and staff's charged with, to really look at the differences of our school and try to provide equity in the sense of need-based equity for all of our children.
I think what I'm asking is, so we know from last year's school safety legislation, one interpretation of it was that more of the responsibility for spotting at-risk kids or kids who could be safety concerns goes on us as a school system. So what I'm wondering is part of that the reason to expand the school counseling staff? And therefore, since there's money being set aside for school safety, is that a possibility of recovering some of those
I
funding?
don't know whether it could be recovered, and this won't be for the purpose of providing necessarily medical or
Direct,
mental
like,
assistance. This will
not
be
like an
much more
SRO,
for just day-to-day, things that the teachers are taking a great deal of their time, and they do a wonderful job, talking with their children and counseling with their children, but I think it would help to have professional support there in the building so the teachers can teach, and it'd be more directed that way. We'll have to see. They're still kind of unfolding all that safety and security money, but I'm not seeing that necessarily for counselors. I think we'd more likely to see an expansion of resource officers, as well as some physical changes to the building, things like that. There's professional development in that grant. There's like a whole bunch of different buckets under that House bill.
Okay.
And if I can follow up on that, we've applied for several grants related to the Senate Bill 1265 that are through the Center for School Safety. They do not support full-time equivalent staff. So most of it is training and intervention training for staff, a lot around mental illness. And then there are capital grants as well, but none at this point relating to adding staff to the individual systems.
Got it. So there'd be more support available for these additional staff members and training.
Correct.
Based on funding.
To get
Okay.
them ready to react to that need. As Dr. Michael mentioned, a lot with mental illness, there's a lot of movement behind that related to school safety.
Got it. Okay.
Other questions? Mr.
The OPEB payment, if I remember looking, it's, with the increase of $1.5 million, it's $5 million we're looking at
That's correct.
paying the budget?
Out of the general fund, yes.
Right. And I realize, the consequences of not paying it in terms of, it's going to be carried as a negative or whatever on the accounting process and all of this and that and the other. But based upon what the other counties are doing, what we've seen in finance, we're ahead of the ballgame. There's $5 million there. And I realize we're kicking the can down the road, to use that cliche, but, that's $5 million. We need money for operating costs right now. So any way of adjusting that budget, that amount, or not paying it all, because, and Mrs. Fisher, I know you're shaking your head, but, and I realize the consequences. You're preaching to the choir when you shake your head at me, because I understand it. But it's $5 million, and I'm not so sure we're going to get the money that we actually need to balance the budget from local funding.
Right.
So is there any way,
It can certainly be adjusted. There's nothing that says you must fund at 100% of your expense that's calculated every year. There's nothing that says you must fund that. And there's even 1 or 2 school systems who are not funding it. But most people are trying to make an effort. We are, like you said, we're ahead of most of them. There's 1 or 2 that are a little further along than we are, percentage-wise on their liability. But We have been trying to tackle it in a responsible way, but certainly the amount that you put into that is open for debate and discussion.
But right now, for us to meet the expectation of OPEB, what is the amount that we'd have to put in at this point?
We would have to put in probably an additional about $4 to $5 million.
$8 to $9 million annually. So what happens is
Besides
if we don't try to keep increasing that a little bit every year, let's say we took it all out this year and went to 0, all that would do is next year, that 9 becomes 10 million you're supposed to do. And then once you take it away one year and you don't get money to even get back to where you were, then the next year goes 11, 12, 15 million. And then at some point, what if someone does put teeth in this and says, you must pay it? You suddenly could be looking at a $20 million a year increase if you delay it long enough.
But what about all the counties that don't do anything?
I can't
I
speak
mean,
to
how are they
them.
getting
and
away
I-
with that? How are they getting
yeah,
away with that?
Oh, their bond ratings.
Yeah, we've talked about this over and over. This is the first
I know about
year,
the bond
this is the
rating,
first
but-
year that it will affect potentially the bond rating of the county, because it goes against, this is the first year it goes against a liability to the counties. Whether that's going to make a difference to the counties across the state, I don't know. We were just trying to look at, it should be 9 million. If we do what we propose in this budget, it will be 5 million. So we're still going to be 4 million short, and not only 4 million short this year, 4 million short all the way to when it's supposed to be paid off by.
It's designed over a 30-year period, and we've been doing it for about 8 or 9 years now, so, but of course, you can reset that if you need to. There's an actuarial way that you can reset that and essentially just keep going down, but when it came out, the goal was to have it funded in 30 years. But again, there was no requirement that said you must set aside part of your budget and put that in. It shouldn't make any difference to on the county side, because we've been disclosing the full liability for years, and it was just, this was the first year it actually went on the balance sheet, but it's been in the notes up to the financial statements, which are an integral part of the statements. It's been disclosed in there for over a decade, so I don't think there'll be negative consequences in that regard. But it is something that, it's just like the pension plan. You know, you read about the state pension plan, and it's funded at 65% or something, and the goal is to get that funded, even though it's not going to be needed. Those funds won't be needed for many years. The goal is to have that funded and put as little burden on the future as possible.
Look at the number of people who are already retired or taking, my thought process is that retirement system, pension systems, in most
Yeah.
places are dinosaurs.
Defined benefit pension plans are becoming rare. They're very rare in the corporate world.
Right.
And
Just, what's our liability right now? I mean, what is the total liability? How many $1 million should we?
for OPEB,
Yeah,
it was about $300 million, and we had about $66 million in the trust towards that, right? So we're around $230 million.
I mean, don't get me wrong, just a thought.
Yeah,
Just-
well, we understand, but
And,
I would be
mean-
cautious to,
There's pros
go
and cons to
backwards where
not,
we are
to
right now
doing
or
it,
to go
to
to
not
zero.
doing it and stuff, but
Yeah,
it's,
we're putting 3.5 in now. This is a proposed increase that is subject to being, looked at again if we're not fully funded.
and
it
theoretically,
was 3.5, I mean, but
Yeah, but
loosens up $1.5 million.
the
to-
liability grows as each year there's another inflationary layer that's added, and you've got maybe more, a greater number of people, because you've got more, the number of retirees is growing, and the number of active employees is fairly stable. And so as you get more and more people on the plan, that liability is going to continue to grow.
David, every year you shortfall what you're putting in adds to the liability for the next approximately 20 years.
I have one more question. The farm rate, just out of curiosity, it's down. Is that because of the economy? Is it people coming into the system and who don't need it, but we lost people who were on it?
We think it's related to unemployment, and
Yeah.
Jeff, you want to speak
I
to that a
mean,
little bit more?
overall, the economy has been solid. Unemployment rates are low. Oddly enough, our numbers of students who are eligible for free meals based on the direct certification process, which means they're receiving other state and or federal benefits, has actually increased. The numbers of students receiving free benefits or reduced benefits based on an income qualified application is actually down. So what you're seeing, I think, is a spread of the data. You're seeing more students whose families are in the greater need category, which is why they're receiving other state or federal benefits, and then you're seeing less students who are, let's say, just below the income limits, or what we would qualify as maybe the working poor. So you're seeing just a split of the dynamics there. But that's what the data looks like at this juncture, but the numbers look to be fairly solid.
Of course, we wouldn't know if there are people out there who really need it, but just didn't bother to fill out
We would
income
not.
qualification.
Correct.
And I think my concern also is, while our percentage, we're down 1.5% or 1.5 percentage points, those people really have jobs that are middle income type jobs, or do they have just enough income that keeps them above the eligibility for free and reduced meals? So we're always pleased that our farm rate goes down. In one sense, we certainly want the money, but it also helps in a whole variety of ways if people are employed and stable households and those types of things. But what if just that 1.5% is really just above that line that would receive those, instead of jumping way up into income? They might still have the same needs as the school system, or we might have the same needs as the school system for those children.
And to put it in perspective for the board, when we look at the income limits, it's based on a percentage of the poverty level by household size as determined by the Federal Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, so or Department of Human Services. So that number is edited annually. In the spring is usually when DHS puts out their number, and there's a formula applied. So to be eligible for reduced price meals is 180% of the poverty level or less. Free meals kick in at 130% of the poverty level or less. So that gives you a sense of where those lines fall, and it fluctuates based on household size. And it's the same data for the entire 48 contiguous states. It's the same number. So, where the cost of living may be less in some areas of the country, let's say, than Washington County or the state of Maryland as a whole, the income level is the same, except for Florida and Alaska, who have significantly higher cost of living, and their numbers are adjusted higher.
Any other questions? Mrs. Fisher?
You said the state foundation's usually based on inflation.
There's an inflation factor that's applied to the
Do we know
per student
if
cost.
factor that they use mirrors what Social Security is using? Because the
fact that-
Social Security numbers have just come out and they're a little higher than 2%.
Yeah, I don't think they're the same number. The CPI is calculated based on different regions of the country, and so what they were using for the state aid is based on the DC area inflation. There used to be a Baltimore DC rate. They broke that apart. Now there's a Baltimore rate and a DC rate, and for some reason, the Department of Legislative Services has looked at this, and they believe that the DC rate is better, more appropriate to apply that than the Baltimore rate. And they're not that much different, but they've chosen the DC rate for now until the legislature revisits that. Now because that breakout just occurred this past year, so it'll be up to the legislature to determine which rate should be used. But for right now, they're using the DC rate.
Out of curiosity, have we factored in, I read yesterday that be a bill passed with the sick leave and
Yes.
Last year, we added, I think it was about 250,000 to our budget for accounting for the safe and sick leave that we would need for substitute type of employees.
that's still
It's still in the budget.
here? Yeah, okay. That's approximately what you think it will cost?
It was a guess, because
Yeah,
we really
yeah.
have no idea.
Yeah, so this is the first year of implementation of that. I'm really glad that we didn't wait on the Attorney General's opinion before we
to
started implementing it.
Find out something, we'd have to do something.
Right.
So staff's been tracking the hours. We do have people, substitutes we are getting substitutes for substitutes. That is occurring. Probably the other change that we've made that I hear about almost every time I go into, particularly an elementary school, and I regret that we had to do this, but we have hourly employees that help us as lunch assistants, and we've capped all of those at 10 hours, 12 hours a week, I forgot now the number, to stay at a point that we would not have to offer substitutes for they're temporary employees. But if they accumulate enough hours in a 2-week period, they qualify to gain hours towards substitute time. I've had some of them that say, I have perfect attendance, I don't want the substitute time, I just want those couple hours back a week that you cut. And again, it was a means of we're just offering more positions to cover the lunch duty thing, but we've capped the hours to avoid the substitute cost. I don't know, it's an unintended consequence, but I think from business standpoint and public sector, I think that's happened a good bit to try to stay underneath that. With our situation with teacher and paraprofessional substitutes, we're in a substitute shortage. I'm a believer in law of supply and demand. I think pretty consistently we're running 30, 40 subs short a day. Is that accurate, Ms. Bishop, Dr. Bishop? So we'll fill 100, I think last Friday we filled 195 positions that required a substitute, and we were still short 40 some that still needed substitutes. I look at it as both a substitute shortage problem and an attendance something that we need to address as well. So that's quite a challenge. And that's, costs that used to be $1 million to pay for substitutes now we're somewhere between $2 and $3 million, I think, by the time we count grants and everybody. Yeah, it's a substantial cost.
It is, yes.
And we're looking at we increased our substitute pay last year, and to be more competitive, we're recommending we increase it again this year. Again, law of supply and demand, we need to find that spot that people will come to us before they'll go to another school system. Sometimes we'll have people that'll take a sub job, and suddenly there's a couple places they can go to get a higher rate, and they'll call off that morning. You thought you had a sub, and they'll call off that morning because they got a job that's paying more, and they'll jump to the other job, another school system. So we're trying to get to that spot. I think this next $10 will make us very competitive.
System-wide hours, that's not individual school hours. I mean, the way the law writes, it's the system.
Correct.
I'm just curious, the school resource officers that we have, the ones that we contract, what is we pay per person?
It's based
Based
on,
I mean, I know the city's a little different than the county, and
yep, so in the county, we pay for the actual cost of the deputy plus applicable benefits. In the city, and David, correct me, or Eric, in the city, it's typically been the cost of a replacement officer. So it might be an entry-level officer that we pay for that replaces a more senior officer that works as an SRO plus a factor for benefits as well. I think clearly the city has recognized that the county has a deal where, we're paying the full cost of that deputy. I think the city would want the same deal as we revised the memorandum of understanding with them. I think we're going to see that moving forward. And it's appropriately right. I mean, we're paying only for the replacement officer. But the fact is, it does take a more senior officer who's more seasoned to take on the role of the SRO, and that's what we're seeing through the Center for School Safety as they develop the training programs that are going to be required under Senate Bill 1265, is that you just can't pull an officer straight out of the academy and expect them to be the right person to be a school resource officer.
so we're talking about approximately $100,000 per person.
Right now,
benefits
for a
and
sheriff's
salary.
deputy, we're paying just over $100,000 for salary and benefits, and for a city officer, we're paying around $70,000 for salary and benefits.
The benefits are very high on the county. The factor's about 57%.
And what do we pay a 20-year teacher, salary and benefits?
Probably close to that $100,000 number with healthcare and everything.
Just curious.
How many, I know we've talked about this, but pretty rare, how many counties actually pay for SROs out of their school budgets?
Based on an informal study done by the school system CFOs, we are the only other county, in addition to Wacomico, that pays for school resource officers out of the school system's budget. The rest are paid at the county level.
I think there are a few that
That may
maybe
do a
pay for
split.
one or two, and then this county might pay for three or four, you know, so there are some that are split, but the school contribution is minor compared to the county contribution.
How many do we have total?
And
10.
10 school resource officers.
I believe six in the city, 4 in the county. Does that sound right?
750, right? Well, 830 is what we're budgeting for next year for those,
Oh, you
for
got
those.
it.
And the agencies pay for the equipment, so the patrol car,
Oh.
whatever their personal protective equipment, that's paid for by the agency.
And Boyd, technically, is each SRO an employee of who's their direct supervisor? The principal, or is
No,
it in the command
They're
structure of police?
supervised by Hagerstown Police Department or the Sheriff's Department.
Okay.
Steve Ganley kind of coordinates things for them as far as our liaison with them, but they're technically supervised directly by their, command sergeant or shift sergeant. They have kind of a liaison on the Sheriff's Department side and the Hagerstown Police Department side that Steve works with as well.
But part of our memorandum is that we set the guidelines and criteria for what they do in those buildings.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
We do have an MOU in terms of duties that's envied across the state. I mean, there are parts of our program that are very advantageous to the school system and the activities that we see between our SROs and our students and our faculty. But the cost is our disadvantage.
Well, and I think it's important to note, and most people don't realize this, is we expanded the SRO program. It didn't come from extra dollars from the county. It'd be one thing if we received additional funds indefinitely to pay for the SROs, and it was kind of a pass-through the county, pass through to the Sheriff's Department, that would be one thing. But we used educational dollars to expand the resource officer program, out of necessity for safety and security for our students and staff and community. So it's money well spent, but it's also money could have been spent on educational resources, and had it been paid for out of safety and security resources at the county level, that would have been helpful to education. I think, some of our research, and we certainly don't begrudge the Sheriff's Department or any resource like that expanding, but from what we can tell, the police department has expanded about 52% over the last 10 years. Washington County Public Schools, from a county standpoint, has expanded a little less than 5% in county support and funding. So clearly the county's supporting public safety, which we applaud, but at a rate of over 52% increase over the last 10 years, while county funding for education's increased less than 5%. So we think we can help with that with a better educated population, which we'd like to support.
May I?
Sure.
Looking at the summary of changes document, page 2 of 3, midway down the page, the talented, or actually gifted and talented programs. I'm wondering how the decrease in allocation is going to affect that program. It seems year after year, I'm seeing a decrease in allocation for that program. And I'd prefer to see that we're looking at reductions away from classrooms and instruction, and this concerns me.
I think the
So,
majority of this is a cost shift to other areas. I don't know if anybody can think of it off the top of their head how we did that.
This came from a review with the supervisor of that area. I will say that.
There were two big significant changes. There's a $30,000 increase in subscriptions and dues in the gifted and talented on page 12, line 17, detail page. And then also in,
Take us to that, because I want everyone to understand where the money went. It's not that it's gone away from talent and gifted, it's just shifted where it's being paid for, I think. So say it again, Eric.
Okay, on page 12 of,
Okay, page 12 of the 41-page document.
Yes.
Okay.
page 12, line 17, there is an increase of 30,000 in subscriptions and dues. And then if you flip a couple more pages to page 14, line 5, which is workshops, gifted and talented, that line is increasing 75,000. And both of these are primarily due to required trainings for IB programs that we've added and increased in the last couple years, that they have to have every year or be recertified or updated every year.
Now, let me make sure I'm understanding this, Eric. You're telling me that this decrease on page 2 of 3, that $75,000 that I'm seeing that says materials is reflected in professional development?
You drop a little bit further down there on that same page, under professional development, the second line, you'll see a $75,000 increase in gifted and talented workshop pay. On that same page, 2 or 3, it's
On the
just,
page you're looking at, Mrs. Williams, if you drop down to line 33,
Okay.
that's
okay.
the shift of the 75,000 from page 12 to page
Okay.
14 of the 41-page document. So
Okay.
the net of the program is really only a decrease of 17,000 and not of 92. Because
Okay.
money was right-sized and reallocated to where the department supervisor needed it best for her programs.
Right,
And-
so
we are required to report all staff development under the PD rather than in the different program areas. So,
Okay.
and special ed has theirs under special ed, but the regular instruction, all the other instructional programs are reported in that one professional development page of the budget.
Okay, and then the $30,000 for magnet program materials and the 17.5 for equipment for GT and STEM?
Well, the 30 went from materials to dues. And then,
Which I believe is the middle school IB program.
Okay,
and then I'm not sure about the 17.5. I think that's just a reduction based on her
On needs of
spending
the department.
patterns. I mean, a lot of these changes are just, reflect, actual expenditures over a number of years, or are needed to go from one line to another based on transfers that the directors have made during quarterly adjustments in the past, and we were just like, well, why don't we just start off there to begin with then?
So as I started out this discussion, this was already happening the last couple of years in a row. Money was being taken from materials, put in professional development, or put into these dues, because that's where the money was needed, and the budget just never was changed. I just didn't see the purpose in, we could just let the budget roll like it is, we could go through quarterly budget adjustments, or sometimes these things happen that aren't a crossover category change, so they don't have to come to the board for a quarterly adjustment. But we're trying to align the budget so it accurately reflects what we're going to do with the money. And this is just an example of that. So I don't want anybody leaving here thinking we cut $75,000 from gifted and talented. We're just getting the right money in the right categories
okay,
as we're looking across the programs.
that's great. Okay, then my other question, just below that, school library programs, instructional substitutes. Just wondering about that number.
That reduction.
John, again, I'm sorry. We're back to,
We're on page 2 of 3 on the
Yep.
summary,
got it,
just below gifted and talented, number 31,
got it.
school library, instructional substitutes.
Okay, thanks.
All that reduction was purely looking, if we look back at the last 2 or 3 years, what were our actual expenses? And we were kind of adjusting that particular substitute line to what we've actually incurred over the recent history.
Okay, so that's based on actual spending as opposed to saying, we're not going to hire substitutes. It's not a change in practice.
No.
We're not going to reduce the amount of substitutes that we provide to librarians.
No, it's just an
Okay.
adjustment to what we believe the run rate
Okay,
could be expected to be,
okay, great.
what it
If
has
there's
been.
Increased need for some reason.
Right, I mean, if
Yeah,
someone
it'd be
goes
part of
out on
budget
long-term
adjustments.
leave, we'll cover that, of
Got it.
course, and it'll just be over budget that year, and
Right,
we'll find it from somewhere else.
Okay.
okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Again, some of this is the risk of tightening and tightening and tightening the budget. At some point, we're going to undercut ourselves. We'll have to come back the other way, much like Mr. Prue when he talked about the insurance mix. I mean, totally surprising to us this year, we had a substantial number of people pick single payer rather than family over the historic part of that. Also, I think we had 23 less people take insurance this year than did last year. Maybe a sign of the economy. Maybe their spouse's job has a better insurance than we have, or the copay or pay is different, contribution is different, and they've elected not to take our insurance. When that happens, times 23 people, we don't have the contribution the board would make. The 23 people are making no contribution. It's not changing the employees, it's not hurting the employees, but it's benefiting us. But the reverse could happen. Next year, spouse loses a job, suddenly there's 23 people are back on a roll, and maybe 25 other people. Or people move from single, get married during the year, and suddenly we're back to family or single and spouse, and the mix goes the other way. So the risk of making these tweaks that we're making and tightening and tightening and tightening down the flexibility is we could go too far. So again, we have done a tremendous amount of due diligence, we believe, on our part, line by line, asked every supervisor about every line, looked historically across 3 and 4 and 5 years. During our 19 budget discussions, these gentlemen were looking up things last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Why was it so low 3 years ago? And they would go back and were pulling up, electronically pulling up bills and receipts and invoices. Oh, that's the year we bought this, or that's the year we didn't do that. So we have spent a lot of time trying to find the right balance of everything here. But I would say to some of our funding agencies, they said last year they looked down to the $50 level. I can show you $2.2 million worth of adjustments we made last year, $700,000 worth of adjustments we made this year to keep our ask as low as possible. I would hope that all departments could do the same.
Tremendous amount of work, tremendous amount of man-hours.
And good stewardship of the taxpayers' money.
And yet, I feel that that's what needs to be done, and that's the way it should be. So I thank you
Absolutely.
for the due diligence that you have done with regard to the budget. Any other questions?
So, overall summarizing, just so as we go into our meeting with the county commissioners, we're asking, if we approve this budget, we would be going to the county commissioners asking them for $5 to $6 million more than maintenance of effort?
Well, the process will happen, and this afternoon's meeting with the county commissioners really isn't about these numbers right now. It's more global. We're going to talk a little bit about historic funding to the Board of Education. I think it's kind of been a mystery, and certainly mystery is probably the wrong word. It's been a misunderstood budgeting process, what's happened over time. There's been statements made, oh yeah, but we took away the bus money, we gave you that money. Yeah, we gave you the nurses' money. We've done this, we've done that. And I think it's just a lack of information. So part of our presentation this afternoon is really going to be go through a historic document, one that we gave the county over a year ago. We've rolled up 1 year at the bottom. I think we had scheduled to talk about it a couple of different times, but I don't think we ever discussed it in detail. So staff's going to go through that, kind of read through a line in great detail to let everybody understand the chart, and then go down through the chart and some of the historic changes, including the change of $5 million for the buses, the nurses, school crossing guards, and the Judy Center, and also the state shift of pension costs to the locals, which was a real true cost new to the locals, and what occurred and all that. And then we can see years and years ago where the county paid above maintenance of effort, more than $1 million. You can see in the 2 most recent years, through low effort, they were required to pay money beyond our maintenance of effort. So we're going to do that this afternoon. We're going to talk a little bit about our demographic shift, dramatic shift in our student population over the last 2 or 3 years. It leaps off the page at you when you look at it. I have some other information that I don't want to share necessarily publicly that I'll share with the board that leaps off the page at you as well regarding some other challenges that we've had. We're going to go through that, and then we're going to have a couple asks of the county commissioners just in big general terms. Could you over a period of years restore that $5 million inside or outside of maintenance of effort to make us whole for some of the things? Could you take the police officers that were currently paid, in my mind, with educational dollars, obviously to provide safety, which we fully support, and take that outside of our budget and pay it through the sheriff's office budget or through the city of Hagerstown somehow? When we make our ask,
We are going to make a bare bones ask. Can you fully fund that ask? Also, for this year, since we're down 109 students, there is the risk the Board of County Commissioners could meet maintenance of effort by giving us $490,000 less dollars than they did last year. Maintenance of effort is a per-student allotment. It is not guaranteed to be a positive number. In our case this year, it's a negative number, not per student, but in total, because we're down 109 children. So we'll be asking them to hold us harmless for that. They did that one other time, I think we were down about 50-some students one year. So those are some of what this afternoon's meeting will be. Going forward, what I think will happen is, obviously, we can have another work session, get additional input and guidance. We're seeking your guidance today on how I might change this budget, make my final pitch to the board, and then you would adopt it as your budget. You'll have a public hearing on it. You'll have a presentation to the county commissioners in February. But a big thing that's going to happen, two big things. One, we'll know whether the county is identified as a low-effort county. We'll know that amount of money. We'll also know the governor's dollar value, January 18-ish, we think. So that's when we're really going to know the ask of the county commissioners. If it's 6 or 7 million from the state, tremendously lowers the ask of the county. If it's 0 from the state, our ask from the county could be $8 million.
So it's really not clear yet exactly what that ask
Absolutely
would be.
not clear
Okay.
at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. So with regard to the superintendent's draft budget, is there anything in this budget that you cannot live with or you think needs to be changed? Gives you concern, makes you uncomfortable?
I think it's very difficult to say right now what we can and can't live with when we don't know what money we're gonna have. The big issue is still what are we gonna get? Where's the money coming from? Because then, I mean, it could be $5 million, then we've got a hell of a lot of work to do. Or it could be $50,000 and then, that would be lovely, and that's easy. You start getting there, when you start getting into 7 figures, there's gonna be some suffering somewhere. And that's what concerns me. So I'm fine with this as it is. Just, can I ask one quick question?
Absolutely.
On page 29, and I think I know the answer. I'm gonna answer it myself and tell me if I'm right or wrong. Down at the bottom, number 29, facilities maintenance programs. There's an other. Is that just a cushion for something that may pop up?
We break out our facilities budget, our maintenance budget into all those contractual lines. I mean, it's really a repair budget, so we really don't know that we're going to have X amount of plumbing or X amount of electric type things. We've debated whether we should collapse almost all those categories into one contractual service line, but we try to look at some of it historically. We've tried to break it out and forecast a little bit of information. Really out of that other is where we do project type contractual services. So where we go in, let's say we're doing a vestibule type project or renovating a room or something like that, we would take it out of that other. Now, right now, our vestibule projects are coming out of our safety money that we've set aside. But that's really just like project money,
I think the fact
kind of
that
unidentified.
It's the same as last year means that we did a pretty good job of getting a number that we could work with last year.
It's a number we're working with because we haven't added additional money. Should we add $2 or $3 million to that line? Absolutely. I can tell you, I was in a school today, we should wall that thing up tomorrow. We should not close it up, wall it up as in create classrooms. Teachers are doing a fantastic job. The students are doing a fantastic job. How they learn in that environment where you can hear the classroom right next door to you. I mean, I saw this several different places I was in the building. I mean, students were chanting. They were learning letters in pre-K. So they had this little rhyming song that they were singing. Well, right next door to it was a math intervention, and next door to it was another pre-K. I could not hear, and I don't have the greatest hearing, but it's a huge distraction in a Title I school. You know, if I had the renovation money, I'd go in there and add walls tomorrow. We started a great project at Springfield Middle School. We added walls in the 7th grade area. The principals asked for walls in 6th and 8th grade area. That's the kind of money we would use, that $1 million, to go in and do those things. But we've had pressing needs of roof boiler, chiller type things, so we haven't been able to get support for. So it's project money, but it should be a lot more than $1 million.
And that would help, excuse me, Dr. Michael, that would help if we combine those schools like we've talked about to get rid of those open schools.
Right.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And reminder as well, some of those schools are also not on public water and sewer. So you're dealing in wells, you're dealing in septic systems, and we would eliminate a number of those and eliminate a number of portables with that plan.
And in that whole design, that's a design to save the county money. That's not necessarily our primary mission to try to combine these schools into larger schools. It's a way for the county to address a growing maintenance need, and it's one of our suggestions, combine 6 into 3. There'll be operational savings, there'll be long-term maintenance savings, but I know some of the communities not going to like losing their community school, and I don't think that's the primary mission of the board, that we'd lose those community schools, but it's just a fact of life that we might have to face. But right now, the current CIP budget does not reflect funding those 3 schools. So even that's a challenge. Again, credit staff for being very creative, trying to figure out a way to work with less and less. Excuse me.
I'm on page 33 of 41. And I'm not, this is a small item compared to the millions we've been talking about in some things. Line 11, in both 2018 and projected for 2019, those 2 years are a big jump over what it had been the previous 3.
Those are budget numbers, and the previous 3 are actual. Every one of those years was budgeted at 9,500 at least, but the actual spending was less. So that is an area that is regularly under the budget, but we didn't want to take the initiative to reduce that line without further discussion.
And to follow up, we didn't present recommended changes to you to this page, which is elected board member services. This is your page. We didn't want to be too presumptuous to make modifications, with the exception of increases which are added based on salaries to board members. That's, mandated by law.
Right.
I didn't realize it was.
But if you want to give us $5,000 back in that line, Mrs. Fisher, we'll take it.
I have heard that the new elected board members are thinking of donating their pay increases.
Wow, they're very generous.
That's what I heard.
Now we only need 7 point what, buddy?
7.975 million.
Any other questions, comments?
My only go ahead, Chris.
Mackley?
I'm on page 2 of 3. Numbers 8 and 9 show a $71,000 decrease in testing materials and a $5,000 in increase in AP exams. What's the reasoning behind those changes?
On the summary.
Numbers 8 and 10.
The 71,000 and the $5,000 increase then? I think this was just,
The main increase on that testing materials
Map
line is
testing.
71,000. We used to do a map assessment program that is no longer being done, and that's the main savings there.
Yep. And the AP is just, again, trying to right-size that budget. But map assessment, we've replaced with ERI, which is cheaper for the most part, and the math portion of ERI, the math portion of MAP, we're no longer doing as well, using PreviLearn and some other resources that we have. So it's a substantial savings.
My only comment was going to be that I support all the changes, especially applaud the increase in school counselors based on our conversation of providing more support in our schools and letting teachers teach and not be necessarily thrown off course by discipline issues. And it's interesting, I saw in the New York Times today that this is something that the federal government's School Safety Commission is also zeroing in on as discipline. So I just would applaud you for adding those positions specifically. One of the things I've liked about serving on this board is we identify things that need to be tackled, and we seem to be tackling it a lot of times ahead of other counties in the state. I think that's something we can brag about. We saw a problem with pre-K. We found the money and expanded pre-K. We saw a problem with school security. I mean, there's still other counties in this state where people can walk through the front door without anybody stopping them, and our schools are safe. So I think we're just continuing this, where we're trying to tackle some big issues, and we're coming up with a funding request that hopefully will allow us to do that.
Thank you, Mr. Bickford. Mr.
I
Stafford?
just want to say excellent job of the staff of trying to show that we live within our means.
Murray?
I agree with both of you, and I want to say that I was at Salem today, and walking down the hallway, saw different people that I used to work with, and they had different concerns. We were talking about things. And the one thing they did tell me, they're getting a new social worker. Counselor. I'm sorry, I apologize. The social worker was telling me that they are getting a counselor, and she was so relieved and so happy to hear that because of the challenges that they have at that school. And so I think that's great because they have over 725 students, and it's a high poverty school, and they have a lot of challenges like a lot of other schools, but I'm glad to hear that they are getting a counselor. So, and they were too. So thank you. for that.
Anyone else? Dr. Michael, staff, thank you so much for the hours that you spent on this draft budget. It's very appreciated.
Okay, so we'll look forward. If you have any comments as we go forward, don't hesitate to let us know. Budget calendar, I don't know, Jeff, if you want to just review that, but I think basically we get after the first of the year, we find out our state number. There's an opportunity for us to present the budget formally to the board, for you to adopt. At some point, you do take it to the county commissioners formally, and I think it's after that that you actually have your budget hearing. So just a little bit, not necessarily out of order, but an opportunity for the public to share. Public obviously could come anytime during public comment, as long as they stay within their allotted amount of time to address any issue, including the budget, during the next several meetings as well.
So quickly off the top of my head on the calendar, superintendents, actually, let me back up. Based on the calendar and what you approved on the calendar, staff will be submitting to the county after the state allocations have been issued roughly on the 18th of January. We'll be submitting tentative numbers to the county so they can begin their budget compilation as well. The superintendent has another work session with you, I believe, February 5th to review. That's the county's budget.
Oh, sorry.
To review this document again.
My glasses.
Later that evening, on the 5th, during your public session, is the plan for the board to adopt the superintendent's draft as your draft. At that point, the BARC, the Budget Advocacy and Review Committee, will begin its review of the budget as well. On the 26th, tentatively, you have a joint session with the county commissioners to provide a budget ask to the county commissioners. That evening during the business meeting, you'll have a section of the business meeting set aside for the hearing. BARC always testifies at that meeting as well as other constituents that want to have a say in the budget. You then have an opportunity to reflect on what you heard from the commissioners and what you heard at the hearing for a tentative approval date. At this point, I believe March 5th is the first Tuesday meeting in March, and you'll approve your budget at that time for formal push on to the county commissioners.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.